Okay, let's start. Ovidiu, please sit down. We're doing a podcast together and he's doing the same thing every time, at the podcast, I mean. Good evening. Thank you for being here. As you already know, my name is Vlad. The full name is Vlad Stoicescu. I'm the founder of De La Zero and an investigative journalist at Sofia Lumină. I'm here as your host. And of course, they are the guests. As you can see, they are the VIPs, they are the most important. I will try to be the invisible host, just asking some questions and of course giving the floor to you also, because we want to take questions from the audience. So, we're talking tonight about risks in investigative journalism, and we have with us Emilia Șercan, one of the most important investigative journalists in Romania, and a target of kompromat, and we will speak about this. Next to Emilia is Paul Radu, co-founder of OCCRP, also an investigative journalist, and I would say a model for us Romanian investigative journalists. I'm not sugarcoating, you really are. Next to Paul, we have Matthew Galizia. He is also an investigative journalist, and he runs the Daphne Galizia Foundation. Matthew's mother was a Maltese journalist who was killed in a car bomb in 2017. And we will also talk about that. Before giving the mics to our guests, I want to point something. I know that we have students at journalism here with us in the audience. So don't give up journalism, we need you. I want to point this out from the beginning. We can't do this by ourselves, this for here and of course others in the audience. We also need you. David, I'm looking at you. David is my student. I also have a class at the faculty. I want to ask you something about fear and about how you deal with fear when you're an investigative journalist, and how can you tackle fear and how can you reduce fear. Our discussion is about risks, but risks mean feeling the fear. You know, we're human. And of course we feel fear and we must manage this fear. How do you do it, Emilia?
Well, I've never imagined that I would be afraid of something or of someone until 2019, when I was threatened with that. So for me, fear, or I've never imagined that I would I don't know, think in this matter before, but it happened. And after that, I understood that it's fear basically exists, and you have to take it into consideration. And because there are threats, and because there are people that are not very happy with what you are doing and with the job you are doing, and with all the things you are putting in the front of people. And somehow is funny, because you know, before I start to write about plagiarism, I covered political corruption, and probably some of you know me from that time. And I was never threatened in that period, but when I start to cover plagiarism, so a job when I'm going to library to discover things, I started to be threatened. to receive death threats, to be a subject of a kompromat operation, after this to be harassed, to be, I don't know, to be the subject of other press campaign against me. So, well, I'm thinking, I feel in some moments that I'm afraid, but probably it's very important to have someone to speak to. And all the time I'm speaking with my editor, and I'm very proud that and very happy that Mona is here, Mona Dărțu. She's my editor, and she's not my editor. She's my, basically she's my, I don't know, she's my everything, because it's the point of, I don't know, it's a point of balance for me. And
is she fearless?
She is telling me that I'm a fearless girl. She's telling me, and I don't know. Well, it's very complicated when it's coming to speak about this issue, because, well, you are just thinking that you are more vulnerable that you are imagine, or you would imagine that you can be. So yes, we are vulnerable, but we need also to do our job and to push authorities to do their jobs, because when it is about journalists that are threatened, or they are harassed, or they are, I don't know, in some danger, it is indeed, as you said, a matter of, it's the job of authorities, and they need to do something, or to discover the people that are doing this, just to give us that kind of safe space we need to.
This really is about the safe space, and about creating that safe space for and these systems against fear. And I think at OCCRP we learned the hard way how to deal with fear. And it's, you know, when you start as a young investigative reporter, as I did, without much knowledge about what I was, you know, throwing myself into, I was pretty dumb, pretty stupid. You know, I was when I was 20 something, you know, I would go out and buy women from traffickers here in Bucharest, you know, infiltrating these groups and doing all sorts of stuff together with my colleagues. And I didn't care, you know, because, you know, I felt that this is, you know, this is journalism, this is how you should do things. But the more you experience journalism, the more you understand that you have to feel fear, and to understand fear, and to create systems that may work against fear. So what we're doing, for instance, at OCCRP, we deal with fear, and fear can be, you know, fear for your own life or fear for your family. I think that's, you know, in many instances much more powerful than the fear for yourself, and fear for, you know, the ones you love. And we kind of deal with this on three separate levels. One is we try to put together systems where if you're in a bad mental place, there's psychological assistance. We have a contract with a company from Paris that, you know, where our journalists, when they feel fear, and fear can sometimes come from burnout, may come from, you know, temporary paranoia. I mean, you know, we always say that a dose of paranoia is good for journalists, you know, because you gotta deal with it in that way. You gotta be suspicious of things. So, you know, but then you have these other levels where you have to create these support systems, legal support systems, to make sure that, you know, the journalist is not afraid for his, you know, property. Because if you lose a court case in London, you lose everything that you've ever, you know, amassed in your life, let's say. You know, so you got to put legal systems in place. You got to put physical security systems in place, digital security systems in place to mitigate some of that fear, so that the journalists exactly kind of act and live in that sort of a safe space, which is not just for them, but for the family as well. So we're working with journalists, you know, on 6 continents right now. And just a few weeks ago, actually about 6 weeks ago, we had to extract someone from an African country. We heard the fact that those two persons were about to be arrested in the country. We got them across the border, across a river, and then from this other country they went to Paris. But it was, so you got to have these systems in place, exactly to deal with, so that people can work in a way that they can expose corruption and crime, and they know you have their backs. And I think that's how we're trying to deal, But on a personal level, obviously, you need the support of the others. You need to speak with the editors. You need to always have this dialogue. And with each thread that you get, it's important not to ignore it. And sometimes we extract people from countries, even if they're paranoid, and it might not be true that they're followed by someone for 3 days as they saw. It might be just that someone happened to be there. But we always react in a way that we create a safe space, try to create a safe space, and to get those people out of harm's ways.
I mean, speaking from the perspective of a person at an organization that is constantly using these safety nets that OCCRP and other organizations, including ours, are helping create. OCCRP has set up an agency that is going to insure journalists and media organizations against defamation suits, for example. The foundation where I work is advocating for an anti-SLAPP directive at the EU level, which will protect journalists to some degree from abusive lawsuits. These things are really useful and obviously go a long way towards making us feel safer and more confident in the work that we do. While I do believe that you need to have a certain kind of personality to do investigative reporting, you need to be self-confident, or at least be able to develop that self-confidence. You need to be analytical, you need to be kind of sure of what you're doing, but not too overconfident. A lot of it is also the safety net that is provided to allow people to do their work without being like constantly afraid or constantly worried that something terrible is going to happen to them. Sometimes you do end up in a situation like that. I remember in 2017, the year my mother was assassinated in Malta, I was constantly worried about her. I mean, not worried, I never imagined, like Jan's parents in the film, they say at a point, we never thought that this would happen. And of course I felt the same way. I never imagined a violent attack like that. But you do feel worried for other things, like lawsuits that mean you would end up losing your house, your family would end up losing their home, that kind of thing. I worried about that quite a lot. I mean, some of this, of course, there is a silver lining to it. It makes sure that that fear means that you are sort of constantly striving to improve the quality of your work and making sure that it's really rock solid. But of course, I mean, things like attacks, like the kinds that Emilia has to deal with are completely unacceptable. They have absolutely no place in a democracy. And I mean, it is normal, I think, for there to be tension between civil society, between journalists and governments. And it is really the elected officials themselves who have to accept this tension. And I think what we are seeing here is a refusal of Romanian government officials to accept democratic norms, which are, public scrutiny. I mean, criticism from journalists, from the public, even if that criticism is opinion and not only fact-based. I mean, these things are normal in a democracy. And if they retaliate in these kinds of ways, in the same way that they retaliated against Emilia, then everyone should be quite afraid, I think, because if they're trying to hide that, then it begs the question of what else they want to hide.
Somehow following up on your answers, do you have the impression, or maybe the data, that shows that it's more dangerous right now to do investigative journalism in democracies? Let's just look at democratic states, or at least so-called.
You mean
democratic
more
states.
dangerous how? As in physically dangerous?
Yes,
as
physically
in violent
dangerous.
attacks? Or
Yes.
I mean, that I cannot say offhand. Maybe Paul has a better idea. But in terms of litigation against journalists, defamation cases, privacy cases where people use GDPR, so privacy laws, to go after journalists, according to the data that we have collected at the foundation over the past 2 years, yes, these cases have increased across the entire European Union. This does not mean, it might not necessarily mean that our work is getting more dangerous. It might mean that we are becoming better at our work, journalists are becoming much better, and they are therefore becoming a kind of greater threat to the people who need to be scrutinized, whose actions need to be scrutinized. Or perhaps in some cases, journalists are more effective at exposing wrongdoing than the authorities themselves in the countries in which they work. This does not necessarily mean that it is more physically dangerous. I cannot sort of make that correlation. But it is definitely becoming more expensive, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to Matthew's, I think what changed is that, for instance, like 10, 15 years ago, when you'd call someone a subject of an investigation, the first question that you'd be asked would be, who are you working for? Is this the CRI? Is this the Mossad? Is this the FBI? Is this the whatever? So that was the first question. And that's because usually the corrupt and the criminal, they have this conspiratorial mind. You know, they're always about plans and doing, you know, stealing money. And they create these networks over very long periods of time, and they can't really understand that honest journalistic work can unravel of all that. We've seen this with Panama Papers, for instance. We've seen this with many projects where you confront someone and say, you have an offshore in the, you know, the Caymans. And this offshore, you know, got contracts in there. And they automatically assumed that you got that information from some intelligence agency, that this cannot be the work of the journalism. So this changed. I'm seeing more and more in the past 5 years that these people understand that this is journalistic work. And that's bad for us. That's bad news for us in a way, because with the conspiratorial mind, they always saw you as a tool. You would be the tool that's used by others, so you're not the enemy. But now they see you more and more as the enemy. So there's what Matthew mentioned here, you know, these slaps, you know, and there are mechanisms and systems put in place against investigative reporting. So you have law firms that work with reputation firms, you know, who approach oligarchs and people who are subject of these investigations and offer them their services. What do you want? You want to sue the journalist. You want to have the journalist and his family lose their belongings, their houses, their everything. You want them to be compromised, so then you got to put some kompromat on them and gather some kompromat on them. How are you going to do that? Well, you're going to hire an Israeli company, let's say, or a German company to put spyware on your phone. So there's mechanisms that these people use, and that's, I think, what changed. So unfortunately, there's also these coalitions of criminals who gather you know, in one place, and they complot against journalists because they have this joint interest. There was a recent ruling at the European Court of Justice, you know, against transparency in the ownership of companies, corporations in the EU. I mean, if you look at the law firm that represented, you know, those people who went against this transparency, they are also working with a lot of oligarchs. And so it's not a huge conspiracy, it's just interests of these people and the fact that they're much more proactive against journalists. So in a way it's become more dangerous, and I think in the EU for sure, with, you know, his mom and, you know, with Jan Kuciak, Martina, this is, you know, this is unheard of in Europe. For
the guy from the Netherlands, from Greece,
yeah, so
yes, there are some cases.
So yeah, I think it's becoming a bit more dangerous, but that's exactly because there's much better work on the investigative reporting side, just as he said, Matthew.
Emilia?
Well, yes, I would say that it is dangerous in the last years, because I don't remember 15 years ago or 20 years ago to read about cases of dead journalists in European Union or in Europe. I don't remember. But in 2018 was Matthew's mother. In 2019 was Jan Kuciak. After this was the journalist from Netherlands, and recently also one in Greece. So I think it is the things are changing, and probably what Paul said earlier is right, because criminals and politicians understand that we are not tools, and we are doing journalism because we do honest journalism. I remember, probably some of you remember, that when I started to write about plagiarism 8 years ago, one of the things that was said about me was that I was not doing that investigations. And someone was doing it and just passing me the file, and I'm just putting my name on the stories. But now everybody knows that is me, and probably this is the reason that I became a target, and I don't know. Yes, things are changing, and in a way, as Paul said, it's good that they are understanding, but it's not good that this is coming against us and making us vulnerable.
When I was a very young journalist, I was studying in Slovakia, in Bratislava. And at the time I was, so before going to Slovakia, I worked for Evenimentul Zilei. And one of my first investigations there was about this plot between the SIS, the Slovak Secret Service, and the SRI, the Romanian Secret Service, against the Roma community in both countries. So they devised a plan together because they saw the Roma community as a threat for the future of the nation and things like that. I mean, crazy, crazy things. So I investigated that. I published in Evenimentul Zilei one story. And then I went to Slovakia for this fellowship that I won. Actually, it was an MA. And in Slovakia, I met this guy, Peter Todt, because at the time, Peter Todt was a member of the ICIJ. So he was a journalist, a member of the ICIJ, and he had this good reputation because he himself was a victim of an attack. There was a bomb under his car, and he presented that in a very interesting way, and he was like a hero. And he was an ICJ member, and back then I wanted to also become an ICJ member. So it was natural to me to go to the ICJ person in the country. And I told him about the investigation that I was already following up on. And a few days later, I got kicked out of the country. The landlord, told me, the son of the landlord, that the SIS came to the apartment and told him to kick me out and all that. So this speaks to the fact that, investigative reporting in itself was used by the SIS, because this guy, Peter Todt, published a book some years later about how he was tricking journalists and the fact that he was always working with the SIS, with the Slovak Secret Service. So this is, comes back to the fact that many parties, including the state, saw journalism just as a tool to get to somewhere.
Can I just add that most of the time we have a lot of fun, like our investigations are fun. I enjoy them. It's why we continue doing this work. I mean, there are moments where you laugh. I mean, one of my favorite moments of the documentary is when they get the photoshopped images of Alena, with her face photoshopped onto the body of a model, and there's that music. There are many moments like that in investigations where you think, wow, these people are just so funny. They're like cartoon characters. And I think those moments really keep me going in the work that I do. Without them, it would be very difficult. I mean, you have to have a good sense of humor to be able to survive.
Well, I think we all have our fun moments during investigations, and yes, this is the plus. Matthew, Paul, I wanted to ask you something about collaborative investigative journalism. Both of you bring together journalists from different countries and, of course, put them to work. Do you think that in collaborative investigative journalism is an efficient way, at least, to show that those who harm journalists don't harm the subject, the public interest topics? I mean, it's efficient. Do you have the feeling that it's efficient? It deters people from harming journalists, maybe?
Yes, I mean, my mother worked alone for most of her career because she worked in a context where there were no journalists doing the kind of investigative work that she was doing. And also because she felt that she couldn't really trust many people. I mean, would working in a collaboration have protected her? I'm not 100% convinced because, I mean, a collaboration would not have been able to do the same kind of work that she was doing. There are some journalists who are well known for their individual personality, their individual style, and so on. That said, there are many investigations that can only be done in a collaboration and can never be done by a single journalist. So you need both, really. You need extensive collaborations that work on major projects that can only be done by groups that pool resources together. And then, of course, you need journalists who are individually outspoken, you know, who run on their own steam, who do their own work. I mean, both are important, I would say. A collaboration can sort of ensure your safety in other ways. Like when you're working on collaborative investigations, it normally comes with a policy that protects you against defamation proceedings, let's say. If you're part of a journalistic collaboration, you do not really have to be afraid of being left alone and being the only one who is sued for defamation, for example. Collaborations nowadays have sort of taught in ways of how to protect the entire group from these kinds of proceedings so that the responsibility is shared.
Yeah, I'll just add to that at OCCRP this is policy. We have a security manual, legal security, and all that, but the policy is whenever you approach someone who's dangerous, you make it clear that you're part of a network and that the information that you're going to confront the person with sits with other members of the network. Because in that moment you diffuse a little bit the danger, because the danger is not you as a journalist, it's the information that you have. And that's you know, what we always do. And the reaction very often is that, you know, that person wants to talk to the editor. You know, so you say, you confront the person who's dangerous and say, my editor told me to ask you these questions, you know, and my editor told me that. So you always blame the editor, you know, and you say, the editor is not in this country, the editor is in the US, or the editor is in Malta if you're investigating here in Romania, or the editor is there. And it's not just one editor, there are multiple editors, which is true. We always have, you know, the information is always shared across networks. And this is the first line of defense. The other thing is, I mean, when you're talking about collaborations and the safety involved in collaborations, there are mechanisms that are created right now. For instance, there's an initiative by our French colleagues. It's called SafeBox, right? SafeBox, and it's an initiative to, when you're working on something dangerous, you place all the information that you're working with in a safe box, which is a secure place online, where other, you know, people have access to that information, so that if something happens to you, other journalists can continue the investigation. And I think that's an important point, because if, you know, these bad parties see that the work will not cease with the death of the journalist, with the assassination, that then they don't have the same incentive to eliminate you. So that's another layer to this. So collaborations always work if done smart, in my opinion, and it kind of deters a little bit the criminals. But obviously, you know, personalities are different, and other issues that you know, happen in a collaboration. Is not all rosy in a collaboration. There are lots of fights and lots of fun as well.
Emilia, you are the lone wolf regarding this discussion. I was wondering if you ever thought of, I don't know, extending your work to a collaborative network maybe in your lowest moments when needing
Well,
lots of people?
my lowest moment, I think it was last year, and it was last year because it was the lack of power, or I don't know how to say, the lack of power, I would say, of couldn't do anything related with the kompromat case, because all the proofs are in the hands of the prosecutors, but the prosecutors don't want to look on them. Basically, with your help, and I have to mention Matthew's help, in the first moment after the kompromat story, I called Matthew, and he helped me to put me in contact with international media organizations and international bodies and institutions, and also Paul helped me to he put me in contact with Khadija Ismailova, a prominent journalist from Azerbaijan, who was also a target of a kompromat operation in her country. And Khadija helped me to put me in contact with Amnesty Tech. And so I started to gather myself information in this file. And basically, I don't know, 90%, 80% of what the prosecutor have in this moment is becoming from my efforts. And it was my lowest moment, so was last year when I couldn't push more the prosecutors to do something and basically to investigate properly the case. And I understood that I am a target because I am the lonely wolf, and I'm rather basically not the only person, but we are very few journalists that are covering plagiarism in this country, where there are about 80,000 doctoral dissertations, and where it is a lot of plagiarism in politicians and people with high profile in our country with doctoral dissertations. So that was the moment when I decided to start that classes about discovering plagiarism, and I had two workshops about this, one in Bucharest and another one in Turda. Because anyway, there are so many plagiarism cases that I would never could cover all of them. So there is plenty of work for everybody. So this was the decision to basically to share my knowledge and everything I learned in all these 8 years, and to share with other journalists, hoping that someone else will do the same thing, and basically the pressure on me will be lower.
Yeah?
Good
Please.
evening. I'm an outsider of this job and the profession. So I would like to know, how do you position yourselves against all the other journalists who are copy-pasting what other people on the other side of the fence are giving them? And also, how do they position them, knowing what they do, towards you, knowing what you do?
Yeah, it's complicated, this subject, because yes, it is a lot of copy-paste journalism in Romania, and of course not in investigative journalism, but in news. There are a lot of online outlets that are copying what other journalists are publishing, and of course we have rules in our job, in our profession. We have rules, and one rule is just to take 500 characters, and after this to put a link to the original source. But of course we saw chunks of our investigations in other sites, and it's not normal, and probably we need more, I don't know, more rules and more responsibility. But this responsibility is not just the job. It's not just the journalist responsibility. It's the responsibility of the team, of the chief of the team. So, and because we are accepting this, the things are getting worse in the last years. So yes, we need to do something. We need to start somewhere, in a point somehow, but it's complicated if the people that are doing this, or no, not the people that are copied, are not protesting. So
yeah, just to add a few words to this. I mean, Emilia is clearly a fighter, and this is important, to fight back. Even, I mean, when you're attacked, you know, by these journalists who are copy-paste journalists, or like, you know, Peter Todt working for the Secret Service, or just lazy journalists sometimes, you know, you got to fight back. And the first fight is, you know, you put out journalism that cannot be replicated by others. That means journalism that has a lot of hard work behind it. Secondly, and I'll give the example from Serbia, from Belgrade, a dear friend of ours, Stevan Dojcinovic, he is the founder of KRIK. KRIK is the premier investigative reporting outlet in Serbia. And they have right now, I think, 12 lawsuits against them. But not just lawsuits, smear campaigns from the media, you know, media controlled by oligarchs. So Stevan was portrayed in all sorts of ways, you know, like French spy on the front page of the main tabloid in the country. You know, that he, all sorts of weird things, that he's into sadomaso, that he's into, I mean, always front page, and tabloids are really read in that country. So what Stevan did, with our help, he sued back. He sued those people, and they lost, you know, and they had to pay money. So I think fighting back is really, really important, and not let things linger.
I'm doing this, yes. I started to do this, and I'm encouraging other journalists to do this when it is happening. And I start to want some of these cases, and it's very important, because you have to do something. Yeah. And this is one thing we can do. Of course, it's time-consuming, it's money-consuming, so it's not very easy, but you need to find ways to fight back.
Matthew, any thoughts on copy-paste journalism?
I mean, well, it is an issue, obviously, but we do have the tools that we can use to fight back. I mean, copyright law is very clear. It costs 50 euros for a lawyer to send a letter threatening legal action. You know, it's a very cheap form of action that you can take, and normally it's effective. What worries me more is the kind of shame or smear campaigns that you know, that Emilia and Khadija in Azerbaijan were subjected to. Because in that case, we have very few legal tools. And even when, for example, I mean, the smear campaign against Emilia was hosted on a website in Moldova. That website was protected by Cloudflare, which is a sort of a proxy service that basically caches websites and makes them load faster. So they were kind of responsible for the distribution of that smear campaign. And I had a friend who works in senior management at this company in London. So I called him up and I asked him, listen, can you do something about this? Your company is basically hosting this smear campaign against a journalist. I mean, these images and so on. And they said, look, we cannot legally take down those images. We cannot legally take down that information. And this to me obviously was extremely disappointing, because it was as though the perpetrators of this crime had more rights than the victim themselves. I mean, while Emilia could make a copyright claim, I mean, there were all kinds of difficulties then. Like, who is she going to address the claim to? Who is she going to contact? Who is she going to threaten legal action against? I mean, and in copyright, the damages are severely limited, right? I mean, there's very little that you can claim. Whereas I think, I mean, especially in the case of women who are subjected to these kinds of attacks, and I know that by proxy, I mean, from the experience of my mother, there needs to be an expansion of the rights of victims in these cases, who are especially women. So if there are any legislators or government officials in the room, I think this is something that really needs to be put forward as legislation, that internet service providers, I mean caching providers like Cloudflare, need to be made legally responsible for these kinds of publications, I think. You know, like revenge pornography and all of this kind of thing. They need to be held legally responsible beyond a copyright violation.
And a couple more things to this is you gotta have these type of relationships with organizations like Cloudflare, with ISPs. They gotta understand what journalism is. And for instance, at OCCRP, we got attacked for quite some time in a very interesting way. So people would copy-paste our articles, investigative reporting, and they would post it on different websites, and they would backdate the articles. And then they would you know, file complaints with Google to take down our content because we copied from them. So, I mean, these people go to lengths that you wouldn't expect sometimes. They're very, very creative in what they do. But when you work with your ISP, with your internet service provider, when you work with, you know, the lawyers who understand, you know, what laws govern the internet, it's always really good to explain to them what you're doing and how you're doing. And even if you mount something like a defense against journalists who attack you or something, the dialogue is very, very important, because sometimes lawyers are not prepared for this type of fight. They're always going through, you know, through their, you know, usual channels. They think about press freedom, which is great, but you need to educate the lawyers. You need to work, you know, hand in hand with them to educate them so that they understand how they can build defenses for you and how they can build attacks for you.
And I would say that I want to say more that basically after how important is to know what to do when you are the subject of this type of story or case. Yes, Matthew tried to help me to take down the pictures. I couldn't, but people from Amnesty Tech put me in contact with another NGO from United States, and this NGO helped me a lot because they took down the pictures it was in early May last year. But I went to an interview to a TV station, and I publicly told this thing that I managed to take down the pictures from that site, from Republic of Moldova. And next day in the morning at 6:75 or something like this, not 57, sorry, the pictures were uploaded again. So they were put back in this site. But what I also learned from this NGO from United States, and I can share with you this information, it is a site that helps you to create some special cases for each picture, and no one can share that picture in social media. So no one can upload that picture because artificial intelligence will detect the image, and even it is a bit, I don't know how to say, compressed. but the picture, the image is still recognized by the artificial intelligence. So this is the reason that my picture was not spread on the internet. So they were published just in this site from Republic of Moldova, because they had the original pictures, because they could they received it in when I went to the police to complain against the person, I don't know who they are, the person that stole that pictures from me. So yeah, it's very important to know things, how to protect yourself. Of course, it's better to learn all this from others' experience, not for your experience.
Can you give the name of the site which like helps
yeah,
you protect
I don't know exactly right now the name of the site, because it's I don't know. Yeah, but I can share with you, and I will send you the name of the site. So this is the reason, because I'm very sure that probably a lot of people want to share the pictures on social media. Even they are protected. These pictures are protected even if someone tried to share on private messages like WhatsApp. So it's good to know this information and to know this site, because you never know when I don't want to need this information, but it's better to have it.
We have a question over here. Mona, please.
To draw a parallel, maybe, between their experience as investigative journalists and what happened in Jan's case. I mean, why I'm asking this is because for some who don't remember, Emilia's kompromat case was initiated inside the police. We're talking about a screenshot that appeared in a website in Republic of Moldova 40 minutes after she filed a complaint to the police. What I'm asking about is we're dealing as journalists with corrupt police. So do you have parallels? Did something from the movie ring a bell?
I mean, in my mom's case, when the person who is accused of masterminding the murder was finally arrested in 2019, something similar happened. I mean, his phones and his laptops were taken into evidence. And because my family is party to the proceedings in the same way that Jan and Martina's families are, we got access to this evidence. What did we see on the phones? That, I mean, he had official documents from the murder investigation. He was in constant communication with the lead police investigator on the case. I mean, there was even a video of him, of the accused mastermind of the murder, so the equivalent of Marian Kochner. His name is Jürgen Fenech. A video of him getting drunk with the lead police investigator and allowing the investigator to drive his Rolls Royce, you know, and while he was drunk. I mean, we suspected that there were bad people within the police, or extremely stupid people. But we had no idea, obviously, that it was that bad until we could see it. And even though we were, when my family, and this is something I think that's really important to point out, when we were speaking publicly about problems within the police, before we knew all of this, we were constantly being attacked. I mean, by the state, by the public TV, public media, by political propagandists, by the Prime Minister, by government officials, saying, oh, you know, you and your family, you just want to sort of confuse the police, you want to interfere in their investigation. This makes people suspicious that you are responsible for the murder. and all of this kind of thing. So, I mean, we were constantly being attacked for calling out of these problems. And then, of course, when this evidence finally became public, I mean, everyone realized we were right, obviously. But by that point, we had endured, I mean, 2-3 years of constant attacks for calling out these problems.
Yeah, I think, I mean, obviously in the Jan and Martina film, you see how the police were executing the murder, right? Unfortunately, you know, many people don't really understand how organized crime can corrupt law enforcement and the judiciary over very long periods of time. It starts with a small service. You know, you get something from a database for someone, you go, and it goes from there, and it grows, because criminals will always ask you for more. Once you're in their pocket, they will use you. And you know, in many countries, you know, you can't really rely on the judiciary, you can't rely on the law enforcement, on the police. So when we do our investigative reporting, we don't usually go to any law enforcement to ask for advice or for any tip about anything, because we know that there's a great potential for corruption. Now, this being said, not all police people are corrupt. You know, there's lots of honest police. In the film, I'm sorry that Pavla Holtsova is not here. She would tell you the story how that police was her main enemy at first. She almost got arrested. Her phone got seized in Slovakia. And you know, this guy was really against her because he thought she's threatening the investigation. And she was a suspect for a while in the case, in the murder case. So that was, but this was an honest policeman, and this policeman was very antagonistic, you know, to the journalist in the first place. And then they became friends, because the policeman understood what journalism is. This is a big problem. People don't really understand what journalism is and how journalism is done. And this goes with the police, with law enforcement, with, you know, judges, and it comes down to what we discussed before, the fact that unfortunately there's a lot of corruption inside investigative reporting, inside journalism in general. But really, you know, understanding how journalism works is something that we must put out a bit more, so that people understand that what we're doing is really honest, because that's also a line of defense when it comes to our work.
I saw it first time in Warsaw in early March, when I was nominated to All for Jan Award, and thank Matthew because he encouraged me to apply for it. And well, I can't tell you how I was and how I felt after I saw the movie. I was shattered. Believe me, I called Mona after I saw the movie, and I told her that it's basically it's unbelievable what is behind the story, and because yes, I discovered some similarities between the cases. Basically, how the police was I don't know, was part of, basically they were the bad guys. And I know that in my case also a police officer, for sure, someone from the top of the Romanian police leaked the screenshot. But as I told you earlier, the prosecutors don't want to investigate the case, and they don't want to find out who is that person. Yeah, and it's very complicated when the authorities are becoming the people that are threatening, and they are part of this kind of, they became part of this kind of conspiracy, or even worse. And it happened in some cases. In my case also, in some of you probably know, the first time when I was threatened with that, there were the chief of the police academy, so top officers, police officers in Romania. It's, I don't know, it's very complicated when you have to trust the authorities, but you are discovering that the authorities are your enemies, and you have to deal with this.
We have a question in the back, right? Can we get a microphone over there?
Yeah, hello. So we talked a lot about institutional safety nets, and obviously about both helping people deal with law-type situations, mental situations, and physical situations. I was curious, though, how much does the public affect you, and the public support when you're writing or when you're feeling down, like Emilia was feeling in the past, and how much maybe the lack of public support helps you? So how much does the lack of public support when you're writing and publishing affect you?
I was helped a lot by the public really support me a lot in the last years, because from a point the public understood probably why it is important to speak about impostor and plagiarism in doctoral dissertations, and yes, it was very important for me, and it still is important. Even now, I'm not very. I discovered this, and I don't have an explanation. I'm not so present in social media as I was before. I don't know why. I don't. Probably it's. I don't know. It's a kind of fatigue. I can't stay on Facebook, and I can't post all the time on Facebook as I did it before. And of course, many people were very. Many people showed their support when I was writing something, even if I was not publishing stories. Yeah, it's important to have public support. And to know that you can count on people when you need. Also, some of you were last year when it was a protest in the street, and it was even, we were just a bunch of people in that protest. It was really very important to see that people came outside and to support me on that protest against the police and the Minister of Internal Affairs.
It's important that we have sort of channels to promote our work, right? So popularity is important in that respect, but it obviously helps to know that your work is valued by the public. I'll never forget one time in 2017 when things were really bad. My mother's bank accounts had been frozen by the Minister of the Economy, so she had no access to her money. She needed to fund a legal campaign to get her funds unfrozen. And someone, I mean, that she barely knew, created a sort of crowdfunding campaign. And I remember my father calling me up and saying, listen, this woman is at my office. She told me that she just spent 2 hours on the bus getting here, and she has €5 in an envelope. She just wanted to give it to my mother's campaign, you know. It's all the cash that she had, and she just wanted to donate it. So these kinds of stories, you know, people doing these kinds of things really, I mean, really prevent you from getting cynical about your work and saying, oh, it's all for nothing, you know, no one values it, and whatever. It really is valued. And things like this, because they happen often, you know, remind you of how valued it is.
I want to speak a bit about a different type of public support that we need, and I think we're getting there very slowly. And that's, I mean, if you look at the overall, and I'm always using this number, you know, if you look in the whole world, you know, there's not more than 10,000 investigative reporters. That's like a small town. So with 10,000 investigative reporters, you can do as much. I mean, you can investigate some corruption, some organized crime, you know, you can, you know, uncover some of the issues, but not much at the end of the day. So we need to you know, and at OCCRP and other organizations, we're creating tools, creating investigative strategies for the public to actually participate in the investigative process. That, in my mind, is the best type of support. And we're seeing, you know, for the past years how people approach you, people from various walks of life approach you with not just tips, not just give, hey, I have this information, you know, but with the beginning of an investigation, with things that they found out themselves. So they want to be part of the process. And that's, I think, the best type of support, because we need, you know, to change how investigative reporting is done. We need, you know, not just 10,000 people. We need, you know, many folds more than that. I mean, we need millions to be able to do this type of work in order to make a real dent against, you know, organized crime, corruption, you know, this corrupt law enforcement, and all these mechanisms that are created by these people against the truth, against transparency, and all. So I think that's the best type of support, and I'm seeing it. I mean, it's one thing to participate financially, that's great, and to support, but when you feel that you're part of the process, and when you feel that you're part of a movement, which I think it happened to some extent in Malta too, after the tragic. I mean, this is something that needs to change. You know, the public needs to be more, you know, cognizant of the fact that investigative reporters work in the public interest, and they do have to participate.
We have, I think, 10 minutes to 10, so we are already over the schedule, but we will have one last question from the audience, please.
I think you already answered my question. So my name is Lucian Checheriță. I'm representing an NGO in Romania which is related also with law education for children. Our name is Voices for Democracy and Voices for Justice and Democracy Association. So the question was very simple for you. How can we help, like NGOs, like citizens, and if you have another ideas, except that you already talked about it. Thank you.
Reading our stories.
Just one thing. We are together with Matthew. We're working with a lot of civil society. And I think that's really, really important. And for instance, at OCCRP, we have a project that started in 2017. And it was a project that we started with Khadija Ismailova, who was mentioned here tonight a few times. It's the Global Anti-Corruption Consortium, where investigative reports, so this is an alliance for now between OCCRP and Transparency International. We do the investigative reporting, we pass the information to Transparency International, so when we publish, Transparency International can do the advocacy. This means sending out letters, suing people, suing banks, suing parties that are involved you know, in various bad deeds. So I think civil society is very, very, very important, you know, in terms of, and we're always ready to share our tools, you know, the tech tools that we're developing are open source, you know, people already improve on them. I mean, you know, there's people who are much smarter than investigative reporters who can really take our blueprints. But I like to think about our work as blueprints. You know, you develop some tech, you develop some investigative stories, but Emilia's story, you know, you can find it in Mexico, you can find it in Colombia, you can find it in Peru, you can find it, as you heard, in Azerbaijan. There's many instances of the same story, because unfortunately this type of crime is pervasive, and women, you know, are always, you know, targeted, you know, and this is something where we need to investigate a lot more. And it's why, you know, when Emilia called me, I put her in touch with Khadija, because I knew that Khadija was went through the same type of experience. But I wonder how many Emilias and how many Khadijas we don't know about. Yeah. And that is where we need to change, together with, you know, civil society and with others who have access to information, to tools, and who are smarter than us.
Yeah, I'm always telling the children that the citizen is the fifth power in a democracy, between the three forces, you know, legislative, executive, and judiciary, media, and citizens. Maybe it's important for all of us.
I mean, one of the things that I've really come to value recently is relationships with NGOs, with civil society organizations outside of the space that my organization normally works in. So we normally collaborate with organizations like OCCRP and others that work on transparency, anti-corruption, financial crime, obviously investigative journalism and press freedom. But one thing that I had overlooked was relationships with organizations that work in completely different fields. Migration, agriculture, I mean, education for children, whatever it may be. Because of course, you know those subjects. I mean, each organization knows its particular subject, knows the issues within that field, has sources and leads which are potentially really valuable, but which we are not getting, you know, are not reaching us as journalists because we might not have any kind of relationship. So what we are trying to do now is just create these kinds of spaces, safe spaces, where people who work at different organizations in a specific field feel comfortable bringing up the issues that they are facing or that their sort of constituents, for example, children in your case, are facing in the presence of journalists. And journalists can then pick up those leads and take them forward. I think we have to create more opportunities for these kinds of exchanges to happen.
We definitely need another panel called Reducing Risks in Investigative Journalism, and of course helping reducing risks in investigative journalism. We must wrap it up. It's nearly 10. Emilia, Paul, Matthew, thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for being here. And to all those present, I think you've put your ears to good use tonight. I hope, at least. We can continue discussions over a glass of, I don't know, water, wine, coffee, who needs it. Thank you. Have a good night.